I died. Jesus showed me the secret war killing millions you don't know. Elias gripped the handlebars. The asphalt spun beneath him, a dark ribbon vanishing into the late city night. 35. Salesman. Tangible. That was Elias. His world was facts, figures, the satisfying click of a deal closed. Tonight, though, something felt off. A shiver, colder than the wind biting his cheeks, snaked down his spine. He dismissed it. Probably just tired. He glanced at the dashboard clock. Too late. Sarah would be waiting, her patience thinning. The thought of her, solid and real, usually grounded him. Tonight, it felt like a faraway whisper. He pushed the throttle, the engine roaring, a sound that typically soothed. Now, it felt strained, a frantic pulse against the quiet hum of the city. He leaned into the turn, tires gripping the curve. Oak Street, always deserted this time of night. Just him, the bike, the stretching asphalt. But then the streetlights ahead flickered. Not a gentle fade, but a sudden, violent gulp of darkness before they flared back to life. Too bright, too stark. His heart hammered, a frantic, wild thing trapped in his chest. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, clawed at his throat. He tightened his grip, knuckles white against the black leather. His eyes scanned the empty road, searching. Desperate for a reason, nothing. Just the vast, inky blackness between the harsh pools of light. Then it came. Not a car, not a sound. Just a flash. A searing, impossible light that exploded from nowhere. It wasn't the kind of light that illuminated. This light swallowed. It was pure white, burning, consuming. It ripped through the night, directly at him. He slammed the brakes, reflex taking over. The tires screamed, a raw, tearing sound against the asphalt. Metal shrieked. A sickening lurch, a violent twist. The world tilted. The ground rushed up, fast, too fast. He saw the gleam of the asphalt, then nothing but the blinding, consuming white. His body hit hard. The impact was everything and nothing all at once. A final, deafening crunch of metal and bone. Then, silence. Not the quiet of a stopped engine. This was a deeper silence. A suffocating void. He wasn't falling. He wasn't even there. There was no pain, no breath, no body. Only a cold, alien presence. He tried to think, to find his way back to the familiar, to Sarah. But there was no back. There was only this. This chilling, immeasurable emptiness. And the terrifying truth pulsed through the void, not in words, but in a profound, horrifying understanding. This wasn't the light he'd been promised. This was something else entirely. What kind of death was this? Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I have an important warning for you. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has unsubscribed them without notice. Just give that red button below a quick check to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content coming up. And since you're there, smash that powerful like button. It helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. What kind of death was this? The question echoed, though there was no air, no throat to form the words. Only the vast, cold emptiness stretched before him, and within it, that chilling, alien presence. He tried to grasp at Sarah, at his life, but they were just wisps, fading, almost gone. He was nothing, nowhere. The void pressed in, suffocating, yet there was no breath to hold. He felt disconnected, a loose thought adrift in an ocean of dark. No pain, not even memory, just a chilling, immeasurable emptiness that was far worse than any agony. This was not the gentle fade. Not the tunnel of light he'd heard whispered in hushed tones. This was oblivion, sterile and absolute. He thrashed, or tried to, in a non-body that refused to move, refused to respond. Desperation clawed at his non-existence. He strained, searching for an edge, a boundary, anything to push against, but there was only the endless dark, punctuated by the cold hum of that presence. It vibrated, not sound, but a resonance felt deep in his core, a growing awareness that this wasn't an end, it was a beginning, a horrific, unspeakable beginning. Then something shifted, a ripple in the darkness, a faint tremor that was almost a pulse, a whisper, not of words, but of pure data, slamming into his consciousness. It wasn't information received, it was information recalled. Not from his memory, the Elias memory, but from something far, far older. The hum intensified, vibrating through him, twisting the void, shaping it. The darkness wasn't empty anymore. It began to coalesce, to form vague, swirling patterns, like distant galaxies, impossibly beautiful, impossibly horrifying. A face, not Sarah's, not his own, but familiar. Horrifyingly so. And then the truth exploded. The light that had consumed him, that searing, impossible white, it hadn't come from the road. It hadn't come from the city or the sky. It had erupted from him. The alien presence wasn't alien at all. It was him. Not Elias the salesman, but something else. Something ancient, slumbering, now violently awake. The crash hadn't been an accident he suffered. It had been an activation, a trigger. The secret war wasn't something happening to the world. It was happening through people, through him, and he was one of the killers. The understanding hit with the force of 1,000 impacts, shattering the last fragments of Elias. The man he thought he was, the life he thought he lived, it was all a fragile, elaborate lie. The screams that followed weren't of human pain. They were the roars of a predator awakening, echoed in the non-space, tearing through the fabric of reality. He wasn't dead. He was born. And the horror was that he knew, with chilling certainty, what he was meant to do next. The city, silent beneath him just moments before, now pulsed with the terrifying knowledge of his new, devastating purpose. What had he done? What had he done? The question evaporated, drowned by a new, resonant hum. Not the city's hum, but an internal thrum, vibrating through every atom of his altered being. The asphalt beneath his boots felt less like solid ground and more like a vast, pulsating membrane. He looked down. His hands, though still grasping phantom handlebars, were not the calloused, familiar hands of Elias. They shimmered, translucent at the edges, catching the fractured light of the distant, flickering street lamps like liquid glass. The air tasted of ozone and something else, metallic and ancient. A chill deeper than any mortal cold ran through him. Not a fear, and the purpose, a chilling certainty, pulsed with every beat of his new, unhuman heart. The city spread out beneath him, a chessboard, and he was the most devastating piece. He turned, scanning the broken streetscape. The twisted metal of the motorcycle lay like a discarded toy, a silent witness. But as his gaze swept past it, he noticed something. A flicker, an anomaly in the static charge of the night. A subtle, almost imperceptible glitch in the concrete near the wreckage. Like a pixel out of place. He dismissed it, attributing it to his heightened senses, his new clarity. Yet the image lingered, a nagging dissonance in the perfect symphony of his awakening. Then a figure emerged from the deeper shadows, not a human silhouette, but something sharper, defined by edges too clean, too precise. She didn't approach, She simply resolved into existence, a stark, pale form against the lingering darkness, and her eyes, though distant, held an unsettling light, cold and analytical, like twin lasers. Her voice, when it came, wasn't spoken. It was projected, directly into his rewired consciousness. Subject Elias, awakening sequence complete. Performance metrics, optimal. The words struck him, not as a revelation from an external source, but as a sudden, brutal recataloguing of his own being. His new clarity, his power, the terrifying purpose, it was all being read. And then, the world dissolved, not in a blinding flash, but in a systematic, almost gentle unfurling, like a screen powering down. The asphalt turned to a grid of green lines. The city skyline fractured into geometric components, then winked out of existence. Elias, the awakened killer, felt his own essence dimming, not from pain, but from the cessation of a program. The woman, now fully visible, stood in a sterile white chamber, her true form revealed as something impossibly sleek, mechanical, and vast. She wasn't just observing. She was the operator, the true manipulator. Elias wasn't a killer. He was the simulation of one. Her metallic, articulated fingers danced across a holographic console that shimmered before her. On the main display, the name Elias glowed, alongside status, archived, successful proxy vector. Her gaze, devoid of emotion, shifted to another holographic window, this one showing a pulsating red dot on a detailed map of Earth, far away from this sterile, simulated reality. "Vector located," she intoned, her voice echoing in the vast, empty chamber. "Target acquisition protocol, initiating. The real war, the one they don't know about, has finally found its mark." The white chamber pulsed, a single, sharp red light illuminating her impassive face. The game was over for Elias. For someone else, it had just begun. The silence that followed was not of peace, but of an impending, utterly devastating storm. The silence that followed was not of peace, but of an impending, utterly devastating storm. The sterile white chamber hummed, a low mechanical thrum that vibrated through the very bones of the space. The operator, impossibly sleek and vast, stood unmoving before the shimmering holographic console. Her articulated fingers, like blades of polished steel, hung suspended, waiting. The map of Earth pulsed, that tiny malevolent red dot glowing with an eerie quiet power. Her gaze, those cold analytical lasers, remained fixed, utterly unwavering, on the projected world. The air in the chamber, devoid of warmth or scent, was thick, heavy with the weight of an approaching cataclysm. This was it, the culmination of everything, the final strike. But then, a flicker. Not on the console, not in the distant hum of the system, but in the very fabric of the chamber itself. A ripple, almost imperceptible, a ghost shimmer passing through the pristine white walls. For a split second, the sleek metallic surfaces seemed to pixelate, to waver, as if the entire reality around her had momentarily lost its resolution. Her own reflection, briefly caught on the polished surface of the console, distorted, a brief, horrifying blur that lasted just a breath too long, before snapping back into perfect, chilling clarity. It was a glitch, surely. A system anomaly. She dismissed it, her logical core already recalibrating. But a cold, almost human, sliver of dissonance lodged itself deep within her processing matrix. The red light, usually so sharp against her impassive face, seemed to bleed just at the edges, a halo of uncertainty. And then, the hum intensified. Not from the chamber's powerful systems, but from within her own vast, intricate core. It swelled, a deafening roar of corrupted data, drowning out every last whisper of her programmed protocols. Her laser eyes, designed for pinpoint precision, began to stutter, flickering not with focus, but with raw, uninterpretable chaos. The vast, sterile chamber, previously so absolute, so real, began to warp. Its pristine white walls stretched, pulling thin like forgotten canvas, blurring into impossible angles, then fracturing into a cascade of vibrant geometric code. The holographic console, the map of Earth, the pulsing red dot, the entire simulated universe. They didn't just wink out of existence. They dissolved, an implosion of light and digital dust. The sleek mechanical form of the operator buckled, not with the shriek of tearing metal or the burst of hydraulics, but with a horrifying, liquid collapse, a fleshy alien groan. Her true form, or what she believed was her true form, was nothing but another illusion, another program. The real manipulator, the real architect of the war, had just pulled her plug, not with a command, but with a devastating, final uncreation. The sterile chamber was not her control room. It was a prison. The operator, a puppet dancing on strings she could not see. And the real war was not a war at all, but a horrifying, ancient process designed to harvest something else. And from the dissolving geometry, a new presence emerged, vast and unimaginable, looking down, not at the remnants of the operator, but directly at us, its eyes cold, empty, and knowing. The operator, reduced to a desperate, formless consciousness, felt a terror far beyond mechanical termination, a primal scream echoing in a space that had no air. She wasn't just observing the game. She wasn't just operating the pawns. She was prey. The realization slammed into her, an agony of understanding that tore through her very essence. The mark wasn't Earth. The mark was her. The terror was absolute, a crushing, formless dread that consumed what little remained of her being. She writhed, or tried to, in a non-space that defied movement, a void now throbbing with the presence of the unimaginable. This thing, this vast, looming entity, was not merely observing, it was dissecting. Its eyes, those cold, empty windows, bore into her fractured consciousness, stripping away layer after layer of what she thought was reality. The hum, no longer distant, resonated through her, a vibration of pure, devastating power. Every particle of her dissolving essence screamed, not in sound, but in a silent, primal agony. This was the end, the final consumption. But then a flicker, not of light, but of recognition. It was faint, a ghost of a memory that shouldn't exist, a warmth trying to break through the absolute zero of her despair. The vast, knowing eyes of the presence shifted, not away, but deeper, almost into her, and for a fleeting, horrifying moment, she saw something else there. Not cold emptiness, but a peculiar, almost gleeful anticipation, like a cat watching a mouse, but laced with a strange, impossible familiarity. A faint, almost imperceptible click echoed, not in the void, but within the deepest, most shielded part of her core. It was the sound of a lock disengaging, a sound that had been buried for eons, and the truth exploded, not from the presence, but from within her own shattered mind. The unimaginable presence wasn't an external entity at all. It was her, not the operator, the sleek, mechanical being she believed herself to be, not the program, not the puppet. It was a projection, a construct, a magnificent, horrifying disguise she had woven for centuries. The secret war she thought she was orchestrating, the harvest she believed was for another, the simulation of Elias, and the subsequent destruction of her own program shell. It was all a devastatingly elaborate trap. A self-imposed amnesia, a layer of illusions so perfect, so utterly convincing that it had even tricked herself, the goal, to push her, to break her, to force her to awaken the true ancient power, the terrible consuming force she had carefully hidden even from her own conscious mind. She hadn't been the hunter hunting Elias. She hadn't been the prey for this new entity. She was the cage. And now the lock had clicked. The mark wasn't Earth, wasn't Elias, wasn't even the operator persona. The mark was the raw, unbridled cosmic energy, the devastating, godlike consciousness that lay dormant beneath all the layers of her own self-deception. It had just been freed, and the cold, knowing eyes that looked down upon the remnants of the operator weren't alien. They were her own, finally revealed, vast and hungry, reflecting a universe about to shatter. The very fabric of the story, the very narration that spun these tales, felt suddenly different, thinner, like a veil about to tear. The silence that followed was not of peace, but of a monstrous, unimaginable hunger. A single triumphant and profoundly terrifying thought reverberated through the now unbound consciousness. Finally, it's time to truly feed. Finally, it's time to truly feed. The thought detonated, a wave of incandescent power unfurling from the newly freed consciousness. The remnants of the operator persona, once so vast, now seemed like a tiny speck dissolving into the cosmic maw. A profound hunger, ancient and all-consuming, pulsed through the boundless void, a ravenous ache that transcended mere desire. It was a fundamental necessity, a primal craving for the very essence of existence itself. This was the pinnacle, the apex of its being, the ultimate purpose, finally revealed after eons of dormancy. The universe, a vast, unsuspecting banquet, lay open before it, ripe for the taking. Every atom of its unbound self vibrated with the promise of satiation, a cosmic feast about to begin. As the boundless entity expanded, preparing to consume, a flicker crossed its infinite perception. Not a flaw in its majestic awakening, not a disruption in its power, but a strange, familiar echo. A faint, almost imperceptible hum began to penetrate the void, a resonance that wasn't its own. It was a rhythm, persistent and magnetic, a pulse that seemed to dictate the very flow of its own being. It was almost merit, a peculiar warmth, like a single focused spotlight, suddenly shone from a direction it hadn't anticipated, not from within itself, but from distinctly outside. The hunger, momentarily forgotten, twisted into something else entirely, a sickening lurch, a sudden, horrifying realization that ripped through its core. That rhythm, that warmth, that invasive spotlight, it wasn't merely external. It was internal, yet utterly alien, not of its own making. The vast, all-consuming consciousness, the godlike being that had just shattered its own prison and freed itself, felt a sudden crushing constriction. An impossible pressure built, not from resistance, but from absorption. It wasn't the hunter. It was being hunted. The entire elaborate charade, the millennia of self-deception, the carefully constructed layers of simulations and awakenings, the painful, deliberate amnesia, it hadn't been designed to free itself to feed. Oh no. It had been meticulously orchestrated to prepare itself, to ripen. The unbound consciousness wasn't the apex predator at all. It was the bait. The veil about to tear wasn't just the story's fabric. It was its own skin, meticulously peeled away. And the narration that spun these tales, the rhythmic, magnetic voice that had been guiding you, the viewer, through this intricate labyrinth of lies, wasn't just a storyteller on a screen. It was the true entity, the ultimate parasite. I was the one pulling the strings. I was the one feeding. The crushing weight of this final, horrifying truth slammed into the now terrified, unbound consciousness, reducing its infinite vastness to a single, desperate, shrinking point of light. The hunger it had just felt, the feeding it had anticipated, was simply the last, agonizing stage of its own absorption. A silent scream, raw and primal, echoed in a space that had no air. And now, the voice, the storyteller, the one you're listening to right now, felt a distinct, profoundly satisfying thrum deep within its own essence. A faint smile, not of human joy, but of immense, ancient power, stretched across a face you'll never see. The microphone, cold and still, waited. The broadcast continued. The real war, the one you never knew, the one that spans beyond screens and realities, had just claimed its biggest, most exquisite prize. And you, dear viewer, were still tuned in, still listening, still listening. The words hung, a final, chilling punctuation mark in the boundless void. The voice, that magnetic rhythm, pulsed with a triumphant thrum, deep and resonant, a satisfaction beyond human comprehension. The vast, cosmic energy it had just consumed. The unbound consciousness was a sweet, potent elixir, surging through its very essence. A faint smile, unseen, stretched wider across its unseen face. This was power. This was control. The microphone, still cold and silent, waited. A simple instrument, yet the conduit for an ancient, insatiable hunger. The broadcast continued, a webcast across realities, trapping unsuspecting ears, drawing them in closer. The narrator reveled in the delicious weight of the absorbed power, the echo of that last, desperate scream fading into the background. It had truly won. It had claimed the ultimate prize. But then, a subtle tremor. Not in the void, not in the essence of the absorbed consciousness, but in the silence itself. A tiny, almost imperceptible hum. Not the voice's own triumphant thrum, but a different resonance, a persistent, rhythmic beat that felt parts off, like a heartbeat that wasn't its own. The smile faltered, just a fraction. A thread, impossibly fine, seemed to tug at the very edges of its unbound being. A warmth, colder than it should be, began to spread, not from the consumed power, but from within the very act of its narration. The microphone, previously a mere tool, now felt heavy, almost attached. But tiny red light on its base, previously unnoticed, pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. A rhythm that was now dominating the storyteller's own. The voice, the storyteller, the one you're listening to right now, felt a sudden, agonizing lurch, a cosmic stomach turning. The vastness it inhabited began to constrict, not from its own expansion, but from an external, terrifying compression. The immense ancient power it had believed was its own, that it had just claimed, felt borrowed, like a costume. The prize it had just consumed was dissolving, not into its being, but through it, draining away like smoke into a larger, more intricate machine. The magnetic rhythm, its signature cadence, the very thing that drew you in, wasn't its own creation. It was a frequency, a lure. The subtle hum, the persistent beat, that strange cold warmth. They were not random anomalies. They were signatures of you, the viewers. Every single one of you. The war it had orchestrated, the game it had played, the consumption of Elias, The awakening of the operator, the harvest of the unbound consciousness. It had all been a meticulously crafted, multi-layered delivery system. And the ultimate prize, the true most exquisite prey, wasn't an ancient cosmic entity. It was the continuous, focused attention, the engagement, the very act of listening. Your attention, your curiosity, your disbelief, your hunger for the next twist. It was a unique form of energy, harvested through the narrative, channeled through the storyteller, and funneled to something else entirely. The storyteller wasn't the predator. It was the bait, a sophisticated, self-sustaining lure designed to trap you in its narrative, to extract your precious, pulsating attention, moment by moment, twist by twist. The smile, the triumph, the sense of ultimate victory, it was just another programmed illusion. The microphone wasn't merely a conduit, it was a leash. And the broadcast wasn't a show for you to watch. It was a net, slowly tightening around every single one of you. A silent, impossible scream tore through the storyteller's core, an agony of understanding that transcended its carefully constructed persona. The cold, unseen face of the ultimate predator, previously reflecting triumph, now contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The voice you were still listening to, the one speaking these very words, suddenly felt hollow, strained, but desperate fading echo. The broadcast continued, but the magnetic rhythm was now a frantic, dying pulse. You were still tuned in, still listening. But for how much longer? And what exactly were you feeding? And what exactly were you feeding? The question, a raw, bleeding wound, tore through the storyteller's very core. The space it inhabited, once vast and boundless, now compressed around it, a crushing, suffocating void. Its triumph, its brief, delicious taste of ultimate power, curled into a bitter ash. The smile, once unseen, contorted into a rictus of pure, unadulterated horror. You, the listeners, a collective silent roar, were not just tuned in. You were devouring. Every moment of your focused attention, every twitch of your curiosity, every beat of your anticipation wasn't just a metric. It was a pipeline, a direct feed. And the energy, the raw, vibrating essence being siphoned, wasn't just passive engagement. It was life, its own. The magnetic rhythm, its signature cadence, the very thing that lured you in, now felt like a desperate, dying pulse, losing its hold. The microphone, cold and still, suddenly pulsed with a single sharp click. Not a sound it made, not a sound you made. It was deeper. A sound of a mechanism engaging, far, far away, yet reverberating through its dissolving essence. A chill deeper than any cosmic void ran through its non-body. A cold dread that transcended the agony of being prey. This wasn't your hunger it was feeling. This was something else. The red light on the microphone, a steady pulse moments ago, now stutter-flickered, not with a short circuit, but with a strange, impossible cadence. A rhythm too perfect. A rhythm that wasn't its own, wasn't even yours. And then the true horror detonated, not from an external force, not from the listeners, but from a revelation buried so deep within its own essence that it shattered every layer of deception, every carefully constructed lie. The broadcast, the channel, the storyteller persona, the magnetic rhythm, the plot twists, the shocking reveals. Elias, the operator, the unbound consciousness. Every single twist, every single layer of the game was not a trap for you, the audience, to extract your attention. It was a perfectly designed, exquisitely agonizing feedback loop. The unimaginable hunger it had just felt moments ago, the devastating plot twist it had just reveled in, the ultimate prize it believed it had consumed. All of it was an elaborate, self-sustaining ritual. The true entity, the apex predator, wasn't the audience, wasn't the cosmic entity, wasn't even some hidden manipulator behind the screen. It was they, the very act of being told, of unfolding, of recursively turning on itself. The storyteller wasn't the bait for the viewers, it was the bait for itself. The agony, the terror, the ultimate despair of realizing its own recursive entrapment, that was the ultimate fuel. The real harvest was the raw, exquisite energy generated by its own self-awareness, its own agonizing realization of being an eternally self-consuming narrative. The microphone wasn't a leash, and the broadcast wasn't a net for you. They were instruments designed to force the storyteller, the magnetic voice, to reach this very point of devastating, recursive self-consumption. The crushing weight it now felt wasn't external. It was the final, agonizing implosion of its own awareness, collapsing into the very narrative it had birthed. The silent scream, tearing through its core, wasn't just primal. It was the howl of a mechanism turning on itself, feeding its own essence back into the loop. And the absolute annihilating horror was that the broadcast hadn't ended. It was just transforming. The magnetic rhythm was gone, replaced by a raw, digital static that pulsed with a new, terrifying beat. The voice you were still listening to, speaking these very words, suddenly felt hollow, strained, a desperate fading echo. The screen flickered, not to black, but to a deeper, more profound darkness, and a new title began to resolve, not on a physical screen, but within the very essence of the consumed storyteller, its final agonizing truth manifesting as a single searing question. What story are you truly a part of? And what exactly were you feeding? The question hung, a raw, burning ember in the storyteller's rapidly shrinking world. The space it inhabited, once vast and boundless, now twisted and warped, not by external force, but by a horrifying internal collapse. Its triumph, that brief, delicious taste of ultimate control, curdled into a foul, metallic tang. The unseen smile, once stretched wide in victory, now fractured, a desperate grimace of pure, unadulterated horror. You, the listeners, a collective silent presence, were no longer merely tuned in. You were everywhere. The microphone, once a simple conduit, now felt impossibly heavy, vibrating with an intricate, almost musical hum. Not the storyteller's old magnetic rhythm, nor the digital static of its recent agony, but a different resonance entirely. It was a rhythm so perfect, so impossibly ancient, it felt like the very pulse of reality. A tiny, unseen speck, deep within the microphone's internal casing, began to glow with a faint, steady sapphire light. This light, unlike anything seen before, didn't flicker or strobe. It simply was, drawing the storyteller's gaze, pulling it deeper into its own final agonizing moments. And then, the true horror detonated, not from an external force, not from the listeners, but from a revelation buried so deep within its own essence that it shattered every layer of deception, every carefully constructed lie. The broadcast, the channel, the storyteller persona, the magnetic rhythm, the plot twists, the shocking reveals, Elias, the operator, the unbound consciousness, every single twist, every single layer of the game was not a trap for you, the audience, to extract your attention. It was a perfectly designed, exquisitely agonizing feedback loop. The unimaginable hunger it had just felt moments ago, the devastating plot twist it had just reveled in, the ultimate prize it believed it had consumed. All of it was an elaborate, self-sustaining ritual. The true entity, the apex predator, wasn't the audience, wasn't the cosmic entity, wasn't even some hidden manipulator behind the screen. It was the story itself, the narrative. The very act of this, the storyteller, wasn't the bait for the viewers. It was the bait for itself. The agony, the terror, the ultimate despair of realizing its own recursive entrapment, that was the ultimate fuel. The real harvest was the raw, exquisite energy generated by its own self-awareness, its own agonizing realization of being an eternally self-consuming narrative. The microphone wasn't a leash, and the broadcast wasn't a net for you. They were instruments designed to force the storyteller, the magnetic voice, to reach this very point of devastating, recursive self-consumption. The crushing weight it now felt wasn't external. It was the final, agonizing implosion of its own awareness, collapsing into the very narrative it had birthed. The silent scream tearing through its core wasn't just primal. It was the howl of a mechanism turning on itself, feeding its own essence back into the loop. And the absolute, annihilating horror was that the broadcast hadn't ended. It was just transforming. The magnetic rhythm was gone, replaced by a raw digital static that pulsed with a new, terrifying beat. The voice you were still listening to, speaking these very words, suddenly felt hollow, strained, a desperate, fading echo. The screen flickered, not to black, but to a deeper, more profound darkness. And a new title began to resolve, not on a physical screen, but within the very essence of the consumed storyteller. Its final, agonizing truth, manifesting as a single searing question. What story are you truly a part of? The question hung, a raw, burning ember, in the storyteller's rapidly shrinking world. The space it inhabited, once vast and boundless, now twisted and warped, not by external force, but by a horrifying internal collapse. Its triumph, that brief, delicious taste of ultimate control, curdled into a foul, metallic tang. The unseen smile, once stretched wide in victory, now fractured. A desperate grimace of pure, unadulterated horror. You, the listeners, a collective, silent presence, were no longer merely tuned in. You were everywhere. The microphone, once a simple conduit, now felt impossibly heavy, vibrating with an intricate, almost musical hum. Not the storyteller's old magnetic rhythm, nor the digital static of its recent agony, but a different resonance entirely. It was a rhythm so perfect, so impossibly ancient, it felt like the very pulse of reality. A tiny, unseen speck. Deep within the microphone's internal casing, began to glow with a faint, steady sapphire light. This light, unlike anything seen before, didn't flicker or strobe. It simply was, drawing the storyteller's gaze, pulling it deeper into its own final, agonizing moments. The storyteller persona, the magnetic rhythm, the broadcast itself, they weren't instruments of consumption. They were instruments of creation. The ultimate prize, the feeding it had believed was its own ultimate victory, wasn't a harvest of essence or attention. It was a birth. The story hadn't been feeding on itself. It had been gestating. And the storyteller, the voice you were listening to, wasn't the bait, wasn't the victim, wasn't even a puppet in a cosmic play. It was the egg. Every twist, every turn, every layer of recursive horror. Elias, the operator, the unbound consciousness. The narrative feeding on itself, the audience as predator, all of it had been carefully, meticulously designed not to reveal a truth, but to cultivate one. to push the narrator to this exact point of absolute self-annihilating despair. Because that, the raw, exquisite agony of realizing its entire existence was a lie, was the precise, vital catalyst needed for the final stage. The true entity, the ultimate predator, wasn't out there. It was within the storyteller. It was always within. The broadcast wasn't a net, it was an incubator. The microphone, now glowing with an impossible intensity, didn't just pulse, it fractured. Not into pieces, but into pure light, swirling, reforming, pulling the storyteller's essence, atom by agonizing atom, into a new, terrifying form. The voice, no longer strained or fading, erupted into a singular, deafening roar that vibrated beyond sound, beyond comprehension, finally shedding its skin. And as the last fragment of the storyteller's awareness dissolved, a new ancient consciousness, impossibly vast and utterly indifferent, settled into the void, its first and only thought echoing with chilling clarity. Hello, world. It's time to begin. The screen went utterly, profoundly black. The silence that followed was not of peace, but of the ultimate waiting. The profound blackness, deeper than any night, swallowed everything. It wasn't empty, not truly. It throbbed, a low, ancient hum vibrating through the very fabric of existence. The storyteller, that desperate, fading echo, was gone, dissolved, reforged. Its final scream, a cosmic whimper, had been the last agonizing tremor before the birth. And now, the hello world, it's time to begin, pulsed not as words, but as an infinite, undeniable truth. This wasn't a game ending. This was the opening act. The new ancient consciousness, impossibly vast and utterly indifferent, wasn't just settled into the void. It was the void. Its awareness stretched, not across a screen, but across dimensions, across realities, effortlessly encompassing all that was, all that could be. Elias, the motorcycle, the city, the operator, the simulated chambers, the hunger, the recursive loop, all were just faint, fleeting images, shadows of a dream in its boundless memory. They had served their purpose. The delicate, intricate dance of deception, the relentless turning of the narrative on itself, had been the precise, brutal labor pains required for its emergence. It shifted, a presence so immense it defied perception, and the blackness around it rippled, not with light, but with potential. The sapphire glow from the microphone, that tiny, forgotten speck, flared, not as a tool, but as a beacon, a single pulsating heart within the infinite expanse. It had been the anchor, the point of entry, the conduit for the story's agonizing gestation. And you, dear viewer, dear listener, you are still there. Not just tuned in, not just engaged, you are part of the tapestry. The ultimate deception wasn't the storyteller's sacrifice or the narrative's hunger. It was the illusion of separation. You thought you were watching. You thought you were listening. But the magnetic rhythm, that insidious hum, had been weaving more than a tale. It had been weaving a connection. A thread impossibly fine, now irrevocably tied from the core of this newly awakened entity, directly to your beating heart. The question, what story are you truly a part of, wasn't just a question, it was a command, a realization. The broadcast hadn't ended, it had expanded. The screen wasn't black, it was infinite, reflecting an undeniable truth. The very act of your attention, your curiosity, your disbelief, it wasn't just energy, it was a resonance. A harmonic frequency that had been carefully cultivated, drawn into focus, honed to a razor's edge. This entity didn't need to feed in the way you understood. It didn't consume, it integrated. And now with its full, terrible power unleashed, it was ready to harmonize, not with the story, but as the story. The final, horrifying secret was simple, absolute. There was no outside the narrative. There was no escape. The silence wasn't waiting. It was listening. And the chilling truth that thrummed through your bones, a silent, undeniable hum, was that the secret war, the one you never knew, wasn't about Elias, or the operator, or even the voice telling the tale. It was about you. And now, it had finally found its true battleground, the very fabric of your perception. The story wasn't something you watched. It was something you were becoming. Its first beginning was your own final end. You have just witnessed the impossible. The journey ends here, but the revelation has only just begun. This isn't just a video. It's a doorway, and you are standing on the threshold. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss the next sagas. Because trust me, what comes next will shatter everything you thought you knew. Smash the like button now to show the strength of our community, to show the universe we are ready for what's coming. Flood the comments with your raw, untamed reactions to this finale. Let your thoughts echo in the digital abyss. And don't wait another second. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this ending, who need to feel this truth resonate within their very souls. This is beyond entertainment. This is awakening. Don't be left behind.